Hi everybody, welcome to Lake Oswego Public Library's first Tuesday music concert. This is our second straight month of live streaming. We'd rather be with you in person, but we're just so happy that we can present this program in some format. Big thanks to the Oswego Heritage Council for providing this wonderful venue, the Oswego Heritage House, for our concert. And thanks also to the Friends of the Lake Oswego Public Library who are underwriting this concert and our entire First Tuesday music series. Next, we'll be back live streaming September 1st, Tuesday, 7 p.m. with the pianist John Nelson. So join us here on YouTube then as well. And now it's my great pleasure to welcome back one of our absolute First Tuesday favorites with a really timely and important program on suffrage songs, Cece Otto. Please join me in welcoming her.
Good evening, everyone. How is everyone out there? Please type in the chat and let me know how you're doing. And if you feel like sharing your location, also let me know where you're dialing in from. I know some people will be kind of from all over the place. This goes just beyond Lake Oswego, which is in the Portland metropolitan area here in Oregon. It is the West Coast. If you are a hashtagger, please hashtag either Centennial of Suffrage or hashtag American Songline. That's how I can find you online, but you can see in the caption below other ways that we can find and follow and connect with each other from here. Again, my name is Cece Otto. I'm with an American Songline, and it is my great pleasure to bring the Centennial of Suffrage to this medium. I never thought that this would actually happen, believe it or not. I'm used to doing performances for people, and this is my first live stream performance doing this. For those of you who are tuning in for the first time, you're probably wondering what will kind of happen. I am a person who loves celebrating history through the songs of the period and the era. So all the songs that happen with suffrage, we will be spanning from the 1860s through the 1920s. That's a very long period, and you'll see all these different types of songs that talk about the movement in different ways. I sing those songs as they would have been sung 100 years ago, but I also love giving little trivia tidbits before I sing them. It not only helps you travel back in time, but frankly, you have so much trivia at the next virtual barbecue, everyone's going to be jealous. So there you go. But up first, I think let's get this program started. I do take questions, and we'll kind of take them. If there's something that's urgent, type it in the chat, but otherwise we'll wait until the end to do that. But up first, we're going to start with a song from 1910. This song's an interesting song. When I was looking at a song to kind of kick off the show, I thought this one's a good one because it really sets the tone for, honestly, what men might have been thinking of at the time when suffrage was occurring. You know, we see these in these songs, and he's not quite sure what to do. And I feel the need to bring up, while suffragette is a very comfortable word, and we say it now, and we say it with pride, it wasn't necessarily a comfortable word to say back in 19-teens and early 1920s. It was considered a derogatory term. You would have been referred to as a suffragist. So this song, I'm Going to Be a Suffragette, kind of straddles this whole, what do men think of suffrage at this point when all of this music is being written and all of these women are protesting? So that's the first song that KJ McElrath and I will be starting with tonight. You can see him right there on the lovely piano in this gorgeous parlor. So here we go with the first song of the program. Say my poetry, try and enlighten me. I'm an anti-suffrage. For my little girl has no brain or a woman's right. Tell me what to do. Is there something new that has struck my Emma? I finally knew just what to do when I called round last night. She took tight hold of my hand and sang to me the band. I'm going to be a suffragette, hear me shout, hooray, hooray. Now don't you think that I am silly, or waste my time away. The sex that always toggle the cradle, I've got some rights, you bet. I I was all puzzled when she said, Billy, ain't it great? And slapped me on the back. Perhaps she tried to explain by singing this refrain. I'm going to be a suffragette, hear me shout, hooray, hooray. Now don't you think that I am silly, or waste my time away. The sex that always have the cradle, I've got some rights, you bet. I say hip, 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 hooray, I'm going to be a suffragette. Thank you, everyone. Yes, it's weird to not hear the applause, but do emoji applauses or whatever you feel like doing in the chat. That's totally fine. You probably heard some interesting words there, but you know, do they want the vote? Wear men's pants and coat, or just run the shack? Right? This gets back to this big argument of what exactly was going on. And for what it's worth, just as an aside, the word fuzzle in this case, because I did look it up, means intoxicated or drunk, so he was a little bewildered, a little fuzzled by this suffrage movement. But this argument of what do women want was really the philosophical point more of the 19th century debates of suffrage, of the suffrage movement. Prior to 1900, as women are discussing and as this is kind of coming into, the fold in American society, what really the great philosophical argument is, what sphere does a woman occupy? Do they occupy the home? Do they occupy a workplace? And if so, what workplaces? Do they have political office? Is that possible? Are these aspirations acceptable? And I think that's an important thing to note with this, because it was more of a philosophical debate in those early years as it was getting on. It wasn't so much just the vote. It was what spheres do women occupy? And this next protest song sort of brings that to mind. Now, protest songs were usually sung with common melodies that all the women would know, so they didn't have to learn them, including this one. We'll hear some more throughout the program, but this is to the tune of Auld Lang Syne. And I will say Auld Lang Syne is an interesting song historically. Of course, it appears roughly in the late 1700s. But we see throughout American movements words put to Auld Lang Syne. There's actually Civil War lyrics to Auld Lang Syne. There's World War I lyrics, as you might have heard on my World War I program. We're here because we're here. It keeps appearing over and over again. And the way this song works, and you'll hear, each verse is a different type of man looking at suffrage. And of course, by the end, we have the most enlightened man and how he views women and their spheres in one way or another. So this is, again, to the tune of Auld Lang Syne, and it is called Keep Woman in Her Sphere. I have a neighbor, one of those not very hard to find, who know it all without debate and never change their mind. I asked him what of women's rights he said in tones severe, my mind on that is all made up, keep woman in her sphere. I saw a man in tattered gown, far from the clock shop come. He squandered all his cash for drink and starved his wife at home. I asked him, should not women vote? He answered with a sneer, I taught my wife to know fought the land not many days ago. Who planted deep human law beyond the school to know? I asked him what a woman's cause. The answer came sincere. Our rights are just the same as mine. Let woman choose her sphere. Thank you. Thank you. But isn't that interesting? And I feel the need to say a couple things at the moment. First of all, if you haven't checked your calendar recently, we are exactly 90 days until the election here in the United States, which I think is very timely and appropriate given it being an election year, but that 2 weeks from today, the 19th Amendment is ratified by the majority of states in Tennessee. So that's another thing to kind of bring up. But I think with these songs, as you're listening, and I certainly felt it when I was reading these words and kind of doing it, think about the decades, because I think we often get so impatient for waiting for things. And I talk about this in the program booklet a little bit. We get impatient for waiting for our takeout food or at a line somewhere in a bank or something. And women fought for this right for decades. A lot of them never saw the chance to be able, they never got the chance to cast their own ballot, but they still believed in a better future. And I think that's an important thing to think about with all of this. So when you hear some of these songs like Keep Women in Her Sphere, I mean, imagine nameless women over decades singing those on street corners to try and be heard and to try and have people think about suffrage in a different way. And I think it's something to think about when thinking about this whole program in itself. I know for me, I've been working on this program for years prior to 2020, and it was something that I was seeing time and time again, and really wanted to share that with all of you. So this next song is to another patriotic tune. As you may or may not know, we didn't actually have an official national anthem until 1931 when the Star-Spangled Banner was declared as the official anthem. So we have a lot of unofficial anthems depending on where you go. My Country 'Tis of Thee, the Star-Spangled Banner, and this next one is also one of these tunes. And this is another interesting thing to think about in regards to patriotic tunes with suffrage. I think there's a lot of thought of, well, I wouldn't change the words to this important, iconic tune that is so patriotic. But back then, it was considered, if you had a cause that was worthy, it was important you sing it in a patriotic tune. It was considered respectable. It was considered important for people. And they would probably hear your message a little bit more by picking one of these tunes as well. So that's something to think about. I know that sort of changed, I think mostly around the Vietnam War, when you couldn't start changing words to these patriotic tunes. But for many, many years, it was completely acceptable to do this, to have your cause heard. And I think it's a fascinating way. So we're going to go into that with this next number. This next number is called the Taxation Tyranny, and it's sung to the tune Columbia, Gem of the Ocean. If you actually know that tune, go ahead, type in the chat, say, yes, I do. Some people don't, some people do. It's always interesting how a lot of our unofficial national anthems are actually British tunes that we just kind of took and write words for or whatever. But this one's an interesting one in regards to the argument for suffrage, because as we all know, no taxation without representation was kind of a cornerstone in regards to why we went to war with England in the 1700s. And they bring it up again in regards to the fact of women's suffrage, because of course women were taxed because some of them had businesses and they worked and they had no say in what was going on. So that was kind of an interesting argument, because a lot of people kind of went, yeah, you have a point. I guess that's right. You don't have a say even though you're taxed. So there's that there. But I want to also bring up, because I know that we do shift this, but in regards to pronouns, you'll hear to each citizen render his due. It is completely acceptable at this point in time to use male or masculine pronouns to mean both men and women. I know most people in history worlds know and understand that. So Anyway, that's sort of where we're going to go. And up next is the the taxation tyranny. Thank you. To tax one who's not represented is tyranny, tell if you can. White woman should not have the ballot. She's taxed just the same as a man. King George, you remember, denied us the ballot, but sent us the tea. And we will asking a question, just tumbled it into the sea, into justice and ceremony true, to each citizen renders due, equal rights and protection forever, to all in the red, white, and blue. That one man should not rule another, unless by the Thomas consent, is the principle deep underlying the framework of this government. So as one man is punished for breaking rules which he cannot gainsay, let us give her a voice in the making. Oh, ask her no more to obey, into justice and ceremony true, to each citizen render his due, equal rights and protection forever, to all in the red, white, and blue. Thank you. How is it sounding, everybody? Is it sounding good? Whew. For those of you who aren't in the Portland area, it hit about 85, 87 degrees here today. And there is no air conditioning because it is a true historic park, so we are keeping it hardcore for you all right now. But up next, we're gonna jump a little bit in era. So if you've been to some of my programs before, you know that Tin Pan Alley, which roughly starts in about 1880, goes roughly till about 1940. We have so much sheet music being sold. I mean, billions of pieces of sheet music sold, people. For real. That's why sheet music is so cheap when you go to antique stores. It was an important and main way not only for people to pass the time, but they also got their news of the day. And because sheet music publishers had to sell sheet music, they had to think of clever titles. They had to get longer. They had to get weirder. There might be a little bit of innuendo. They might have double entendres, that kind of thing. And this next title, normally when I'm doing this live, I would say, I want you to wait until the end and then I want you to guess what the title is. But I don't have that luxury. COVID times call for virtual measures. So what we are doing is I will give you that title. But it's so fun because this song not only has the layer that you're thinking of suggestion with this song from 1916, it also talks about this kind of point. The title of the song is She's Good Enough to Be Your Baby's Mother, and She's Good Enough to Vote With You. Right? Yeah. So, yeah, laughter emojis, whatever, but that's literally the title. So she's good enough to be your baby's mother, and she's good enough to vote with you. That not only has the meaning that all of you probably think, but it's also an interesting point in regards to you've married this woman, and she's raising your children, and you trust her to nurture and love your children and have them be good citizens. So why wouldn't you trust her to vote? That's sort of the other angle on this that one could argue. And I feel the need, too, that because it is 1916, you'll hear in the second verse that we talk about World War I briefly. And that, of course, plays a huge part in partially why women got the right to vote. I wouldn't even say partially. I think it was a very big part in why women got the right to vote, because women had to take so many different positions when men were fighting in a way. So without further ado, here's She's Good Enough to Be Your Baby's Mother. She's Good Enough to Vote With You. No man is greater than his mother. No man is half so good. No man is better than the wife he loves. Your love will guide him, whatever between him. She's good enough to love you and adore you. She's good enough to bear your troubles for you. And if your tears were falling today, nobody else would kiss them away. She's good enough to warm your heart with kisses when you are lonesome and blue. She's good enough to be your baby's mother. And she's good enough to vote with you. Man plunged the world in war and sadness. She must protest in vain. Let's hope and pray someday we'll hear the same. Stop all your madness, I bring you gladness. She's good enough to love you and adore you. She's good enough to bear your troubles for you. And if your tears were falling today, nobody else would kiss them away. She's good enough to warm your heart with kisses when you are lonesome and blue. She's good enough to be your baby's mother. And she's good enough to vote with you. Thank you, everyone.
We have 34 people watching
Yay, 34 people!
from about 10 different states and Australia.
Oh my God, Australia, you win! I am so glad that you're all here. If you're tuning in late, again, my name is Cece, Otto. I'm with the American Songline. I'm doing a program of women's suffrage music to commemorate the centennial of the ratification of the 19th Amendment. If you do have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I will be kind of taking questions more at the end to just kind of keep things moving along so you can hear all these great tunes. So up next is one of my personal favorites. This goes back all the way to 1863. So think about that, folks. For those of you who, it's at the height of the Civil War. The height of the Civil War, where we're fighting about various rights. And this is a parlor song. Parlor songs, think of Stephen Foster. He's kind of the most famous composer from this era. Height of the Civil War, this is considered the earliest feminist song that we kind of roughly know of historically. It's called Let Us Speak Our Minds If We Die For It. And it's a fascinating piece because there are times where it almost gets militant in its tone. And I often think with just changing a word here or there, not much on some levels probably has changed when we think about things today versus things then. So 1863, when women aren't allowed to dine alone in public, you had to have a chaperone, this song was written. Scholars tend to debate if this song is actually ironic, but we really don't see irony in music until Tin Pan Alley comes into full force into the late 1800s and early 1900s. So I tend to think that this is a genuine sentiment in regards to how it was performed. So imagine a parlor like this one, where women kind of had that domain where they would sing these songs and have their meetings in secret about suffrage, right? They couldn't meet publicly for a very, very long time. And this was probably one of the songs that they knew about. Now, interestingly, at the final verse, it's noted on the sheet music, it's a moral, because Victorian music had to have a moral at the end of the story, at the end of the song, otherwise it just was an inferior song through and through. So without further ado again, here is Let Us Speak Our Minds If We Die For It. Men tell us 'tis fit that wives should submit to their husbands submissively weakly. But whatever they say, their wives should obey, unquestioning, stupidly, weakly. Our husbands would make us our own dictum take, that ever aware for a wife or it. But I don't and I can't, and I won't and I shan't. No, I will speak my mind if I die for it. For we know it's a fudge to say man's the best judge of what should be and shouldn't and so on. That woman should bow or attempt to say how she considers that matter should go on. I never yet gave up myself as a slave. However, my husband might try for it, for I can't and I won't, and I shan't and I don't. No, I will speak my mind if I die for it. And the ladies, I hope, with husbands to cope with the rights of the sex will not trifle. We all, if we choose, our tongues but to use, can all opposition soon stifle. Let man, if he will, and bid us be still, and silent a price will pay high for it. For we won't and we can't, and we don't and we shan't. Let us all speak our minds if we die for it. Thank you. Isn't that an interesting anomaly? That's 1863, people. And I love the fact that I got to sing stupidly in a song. That was kind of fun for me. I normally don't get to do that. You know, before doing all this great historical music, I was in opera. You don't sing stupid in an opera normally. But I love the fact that, I mean, other than a couple words here and there, it's kind of crazy to think that not much has changed. I can almost envision someone in a coffee shop singing a song. We are at 1915 now. These next two songs are from 1915. So think about that. World War I's just begun. We've got another election coming up. And we're going to hear two opposing viewpoints on suffrage. Yeah, we're going to get into that. But up first is this next song that's inspired by Elizabeth Gurley Flynn. If you know of her, please type in the chat and say, yes, I do. But for those who don't, she was a prominent suffragist. She actually founded the ACLU. So she was extremely powerful in regards to these circles, but she also was part of the industrial workers of the world, which again is another layer into this. As women are starting to go into the workforce in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they have these organizations, they have long working hours, and these workers' unions are rising up. And suffrage is a part of that movement as well. And this song is believed to be about her. And that's what's a fascinating thing about it. There's one word in here that you're going to go, what does that mean? It's the word grafters. Grafters are corrupt people. That's the rough translation for this. But what I love about this song, it's entirely Edwardian in its feel. It doesn't sound jazzy. It doesn't sound like ragtime. It's really of its time. It's really of 1915. So of the first 1915 songs, here's Rebel Girl. There are women by descriptions in this real world as everyone in a bosom is beating, that is true to a class and a kind. And the crafters in terror are trembling, for in spite and defiance shall fall. For the only and thoroughbred lady is the rebel. That's the rebel, that's the rebel, to the working class she's a precious girl. She brings courage, pride, and joy to the fighting rebel. We got girls before, but we need some more in the industrial workers of the world. For it's great to fight for freedom with a rebel. Thank you. How is everyone doing? How are we doing for time? Are we doing good?
7:34.
Wow. Okay, great. All right.
Lots of questions queued up.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, gentlemen. Yes, cameraman Dan and Chris, who introduced me at the beginning, will be here to take, or is taking your questions and watching the chat. Thank you both for doing that. So up next is an anti-suffrage song. Boo, I know. Go ahead, emojis, chat, whatever. We really don't see a lot of anti-suffrage songs, and here's why. It wasn't really considered a threat until the 19-teens. And then all of a sudden we have some anti-suffrage songs appearing, and they're appearing everywhere. And so this song appears in 1915. And what's interesting about it, we have, and this appears in Victorian times, flowers mean different symbols and things. There's a language behind flowers as a whole. And the rose, the red rose, means purity and truth and all these other things. And in this song, they note jonquils as the suffrage flower. Suffrage, again, just being those jonquils are totally disdainful. As we know it here in America, the jonquils change into yellow roses. And when ratification was occurring between 1919 and 1920, you could tell on the lapel of a gentleman's coat in Congress who was a suffragist and who wasn't by the flower they were wearing. Hence the Battle of the War of the Roses really actually occurs with this. And Tennessee notes this as they're going through ratification. He was wearing yellow and red roses 2 weeks from 100 years ago today. So you'll note, and I'm going to break character momentarily. You think air quotes are a new thing, but they're not. They're in sheet music from long, long ago. And I will pause to do the air quotes so that you can see where that appears. But again, we're now in 1915, so irony's left and right. Here is the anti-suffrage rose. Suffragists say, happen what may, now in the coming fight. Twixt you and me, I don't agree. We're gonna show them who's right. Jonquils they wear, can compare with the anti-suffrage rose. Token of love and a gift from above, loveliest flower that grows. Red anti-suffrage rose, you're the flower that's best of all. You're better far than jonquils are. We are going to prune it in the fall. Sweetest flower in all the world. Everybody knows you're the emblem of the anti-suffrage cause. You're the red rose. Work for the cause, no time to pause. Tell all the men you know. Why should a few rule over you? Suffrage is every man's goal. Beautiful flower, sign of the hour. If the jonquil wants to bite, you cannot fall. You're the queen of them all. Emblem of truth and right. Red anti-suffrage rose, you're the flower that's best of all. personally that was one of the hardest songs for me to memorize. I wonder why. I think my subconscious was trying to tell me something. We're going to skip that song because of time. Yeah. Yes, I know that Zoom fatigue and screen fatigue is a real thing, so I would like to keep this as close to the top of the hour as possible. So we're going to keep plugging along. Up next it was titled The New America. And, women, when they would meet in these parlors, they started to meet in conventions post-Reconstruction in the 70s, 1870s, 1880s. And many a time when women would meet for their suffrage meetings, they would sing songs or they would recite poems to boost morale, to help build the cause. And again, because this next one's a patriotic tune, it would be heard and more respected by the average passerby on the street. And so this one I think is an interesting kind of heralding back. So this is My Country 'Tis of Thee. What we're going to do is I'm going to sing the first verse that everybody knows. And then I'm going to sing the suffrage lyrics afterwards. There are 3 verses. Obviously, you are at home, and I cannot hear you, and you cannot hear me. So if you feel the need to sing along to My Country 'Tis of Thee, I welcome that, or just drop along or hum or whatever. Whatever makes you feel comfortable, but it's entitled The New America, but this is really My Country 'Tis of Thee with suffrage lyrics. My country 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountain side, let freedom ring. Our country now from thee claim we our liberty in freedom's name. Guarding homes of fires, daughters of patriot sires, their zeal our own inspires, justice to claim. Women in every age for this great heritage tributes have paid. Our birthright claim we now longer refuse to bow. On freedom's altar now our hand is laid. Sons, will you longer see mothers unbending knee for justice reign? Rise now in manhood's might, with those great souls unite, to speak the dawning light of freedom's day. Thank you. I think it's interesting to note, because and thank you for any applause, chat, anything that's coming through. I think that one's an interesting one to think about, because it actually brings sons into the fold. Sons, will you no longer see mothers on bended knee? Rise up now in manhood's might. So there was this call for men to be real men and give women the right to vote. And I think it's an interesting turn of play on words. Is Stacy Farian on the chat? If you are, could you please type yes or no and let me know that you're here? Thank you for the water break, everybody. And I hope you're all doing well and staying safe and everything. I want to again thank the generosity of the Friends of the Library and the Lake Oswego Public Library for giving me this opportunity to share this around the world now. I'm truly humbled and touched by this. You can tell that I'm so passionate about this, and to be able to share it in this medium is really an opportunity and a gift. Cece, if you're not here, I will bring Cece up. This next song, for those of you who have been to my programs before, I often find, I got started with my Lincoln Highway program back in 2013. We kept finding words and poems from back then that didn't have music set to, and I feel the need to set certain things. So the World War I program had a contemporary setting of a poem written by a pacifist and a woman during World War I. And when this poem came up, I couldn't find the music for it. It was actually written in 1875 and presented in Philadelphia in time for all of those. They were actually starting to celebrate the Centennial at that point, for the country. And I couldn't find the music. And my good friend Cece Farian, who is a piano player, she's a composer in Denver, and I used to live in Denver at one point. I said, hey, what do you think about taking this poem and putting this to music? And she said, I would love to. And so this is this piece of the song. The poem speaks to what it would look like 100 years after women get the right to vote. And I'm sure on some levels you probably might laugh at some of what's said here. Some of it may feel very bittersweet. But I think it's an interesting thing to, again, think about, because they were aspiring for these types of changes. And it's a beautiful setting to this poem. So again, this is called 100 Years Hence. $100 hence, what a change will be made in politics, morals, religion, and trade, in statesmen who mingle or ride on the fence. These things will be altered 100 years hence. Our laws then will be compulsory rules, our prisons converted to national schools. The pleasure of sitting, 'tis all pretense, and people will find it 100 years hence. All cheating and fraud will be laid on the shelf. Men will not get drunk, nor be bogged up in self, but all live together, good neighbors and friends, just as Christian folks are too, 100 years hence. Then woman, man's partner, man's equal shall stand, while beauty and harmony govern the land. To think for oneself will bring no offense. The world will be thinking 100 years hence. Oppression and war will be heard of no more, nor the blood of our slave leave its print on our shore. Conventions will then be a useless expense, for the free suffrage 100 years hence. Instead of speech making to satisfy wrong, we'll all join the chorus to sing freedom's song. And if the millennium is not Thank you. I know that's probably a hard song to hear, even with all the world events that have transpired prior to, the middle of March. But I think it's important to hear their message, and I think it's important to take that in our own context and move forward. I've got a couple more songs. I'm sure we've got a little bit of time. I'd like to, this next song, who has heard of Jane Addams? If you have, type in the chat. Yes, you have. No, you haven't. Chris, of course, raised his hand. He's a learned dude, so he knows Jane Addams. Anybody who lives in the Chicago area also knows Jane Addams, too. She was a social worker and a rights activist, and she founded Hull House in regards to helping the poor and the needy, and she did lots of other things. But Hull House created their own version of suffrage songs, and when I was thinking of the end of this suffrage program, this song came to mind. And it's such a powerful song. It's a march. It's again from the teens, right? As everybody's marching and getting their word out before suffrage passes. And I love the words to it. So this is called basically the suffrage song, but a lot of people call it "Let Us Sing As We Go, Votes for Women." Let us sing as we go, votes for women. Let us sing as we go, votes for women. Though the way may be hard, though the battle be long, let our triumph be sure. Put your heart into song, into cheering and song, votes for women. For the right shall be hailed over all. See the banner is bright, streaming over us, and the marvelous open before us. Let the trumpets be blown, let our purpose be known. Put your voice and your soul in the chorus. Let us sing as we go, votes for women. Let us sing as we go, votes for women. Though the way may be hard, though the battle be long, yet our triumph is sure. Put your heart into song, into cheering and song, votes for women. For the right shall be hailed over all. Let us sing as we go, votes for women. Let us sing as we go, votes for women. There's a voice we have heard and shall hear till we die. By its word we are stood, and this word we reply. It is time, votes for women. For the right shall be veiled over all. For the fields of the past lie behind us, and instead truth no longer can bind us. Let us march with the will till the trumpets be still. In the peace that our strongly shall bind us. Let us sing as we go, votes for women. Let us sing as we go, votes for women. Though the way may be hard, though the battle be long, yet our triumph is sure. Put your heart into song, into cheering and song, votes for women. For the right shall be hailed over all. Thank you. So, do we have time for one more that's a non-suffrage song? Anybody interested? Type in the chat, yes, no. What do we got? I would like to give a sneak peek to my prohibition program that's coming up next, actually. Because, of course, suffrage and prohibition are linked in different ways. I do feel the need to say that women did influence, but, the Volstead Act was passed prior to suffrage, so not all women are to blame for prohibition from that perspective because they couldn't vote. So there's that. But I would love to give you a little taste of what the prohibition program looks like. And this is going to be one of the songs on it. So when the Volstead Act was passed, it was passed in the spring of 1919. And so people had plenty of time to stock up. And this song became one of the most popular songs of that year. And no surprise, I think if it was going to be written now, there would be bargaining for toilet paper maybe and other things like that. But what we'll see though is everybody wants a key to this guy's cellar. And here's what happens. Down in my cellar, I've been changing everything around. I was secret hidden there on guard with my wife. The only one mistake I made, I told it to my wife. Now everybody wants a key to my cellar, my cellar, my cellar. People who before one give me a tumble. Even perfect strangers are beginning to rumble. Cause I won't let them grab the key to my cellar. They'll never get in, just let them try. They can have my money, they can have my car, they can have my wife if they want to ever. But they can't have the key that opens my cellar if the whole darn world goes right. Down in my cellar, I've been having parties every night. People that I never knew come up and talk to me. They're trying hard to find out where I hang my cellar key. Oh, everybody wants a key to my cellar, my cellar, my cellar. People who before one give me a tumble. Even perfect strangers are beginning to rumble. Cause I won't let them have the key to my cellar. They'll never get in, just let them try. They can have my money, they can have my car, they can have my wife if they want to have that car. But they can't have the key that opens my cellar if the whole darn world goes dry. Thank you. Yes, he gets rather exasperated in that song. Wow. Well, thank you, everyone. What time is it?
7:55.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Questions?
Perfect. I also want to give another shout out to the Oswego Heritage Council for letting me use this parlor. Thank you to Shar and the board and everybody else. Shar would like to, I'd like to share that basically they preserve the history of Lake Oswego, and anybody who has lived here or has grown up here is welcome to come by, see this lovely little museum, this lovely parlor room, which I'm performing in, and just come and learn more history about Lake Oswego, because this town has been around since 1843. There's been a settlement here since the 1840s. I'm looking at the person who works in Lake Oswego. Sorry, but then it became a town in 1910, I believe. That's what I was looking up. But I want to again thank the Oswego Heritage Council for making this possible. This is just the perfect setting, and acoustically, I think it's been fantastic. So, without further ado, questions. Go ahead, fire away.
Okay, from Rachel Woody, what's the most interesting historical record you've come across in your research?
Wow.
Can you repeat them on the record?
Yes. So what is the most interesting historical record that I have come upon in my research? I think on some levels that's coming. And here's why. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, an opera house that I performed at in Ohio, that it dates from 1886, it's a working opera house, he received a huge collection of close to 1,000 pieces of sheet music. And he said, would you like to see any of them? And I heard from him today that he's putting them all on a thumb drive so I can look at everything because he scanned it in. What I think is going to be interesting, and I've seen some layers of vaudeville and choral work and other things that are coming through that are just different. I think what has fascinated me in regards to the record is just, I think when we look back to the past and we look back to a different time, we often think that everybody was prudish and had higher morals and that kind of thing. And the truth is they were just as normal and everyday as we are now. And I see that a lot in the songs and in the innuendo and stuff. I think Let Us Speak Our Minds, If We Die For It, holds a special place in my heart. It was just such a neat find. With the Prohibition program, it's going to be neat to bring in some of the temperance songs that are coming up, because they're almost downright laughable in regards to how they're going to get you to tug at your heartstrings. So you have to stay tuned for that. But I think that's kind of the quick slice and dice answer to that question. Thank you, Rachel.
Okay. Judy Costello had a group of questions about the kind of logistics of the songs. When would they sing these songs? Did they sing them a cappella or with accompaniment usually? Did people harmonize on them? Did men sing them? And who wrote them? Or are there recordings of them from the period?
So the earliest we have recordings and recorded sound is from kind of the late 1800s into the 1890s. Cylinders were very expensive to produce and make, and remember, microphones were acoustic at that point, they weren't electric. So to create a record was difficult. So anything from the 19-teens onwards, there probably was a recording. Prior to that, probably not. That's why I think 100 Years Hence has been hard for me to track down, because trying to find the music and stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if women harmonized, with this. What they would do is they had lyric booklets of different converted songs, poems, that kind of thing, and they would walk and march, or they would stand in place and march. In a lot of their meetings that would take places in parlors or in homes like these when they weren't at the big conventions, they would usually, again, begin and end with either a poem or a song. And that was a very big thing. I think we forget in American culture how much music really played a part in everyday life in the 19th century and into the early 20th century. It was how you entertained yourself. It was how you got news of the day, especially when Tin Pan Alley exploded. And so there's a lot of information there, and people really, thought about that and were part of it. I know there were questions I missed there.
When would they sing them? Like under what circumstances?
Typically, so when they would protest, we're talking hours at a time. So there would be periods where they would sing for a little bit and then they would chant. And I think people would take turns also so their voices wouldn't get tired. We don't have exact verbatim stuff with this in the diaries and things, mostly because, again, some of this was still so much in secret. And so they wouldn't necessarily notate their activities. They'd notate luncheon, or that kind of thing. I found that most of them would stand and sing. They wouldn't necessarily walk and sing. And I feel the need to note this too, because I get this question, has it come up of why I'm not wearing white?
I didn't see that one.
I get this one with the few times I performed it prior to quarantine, is why am I not wearing white? And because a woman who was protesting and or going to meetings had to look respectable. And this is a very perfect outfit for 1920, hat and all. So you had to look respectable, and so white was not so much, they were part of very big marches, but on the whole, most women, when they protested for all those decades, were wearing their everyday clothes like what you're seeing me here tonight. Did I get it all?
Yep.
Any other questions, anybody?
Kathy Ruth wanted to know if you were going to do a program on Cole Porter. Were you planning a program on Cole Porter?
Well, with Prohibition, Cole Porter does start to kind of enter the scene in the late 20s and early 30s. I went to my Facebook page and I actually posted a question to all my followers and said, when you think of the late 20s or the early 1930s, what is the song that comes to mind? And someone said Anything Goes. 1935, right?
Cole Porter was really mostly about, if it wasn't about sex, it was about satirizing the upper class.
Yes,
that he was part of.
Anything Goes is about basically making fun of those upper elite in Hollywood. And I want to, again, if you can, with emojis or whatever, please give a big round of applause to KJ Nick Elrath for the keys. I know it's kind of weird. We're used to kind of formally bowing, and I'm sorry for not acknowledging you sooner. But again, he also is a music historian in his own right and has studied this music a lot. But Cole Porter's there. I was thinking Cole Porter, there's kind of the big guns in regards to Prohibition.
Berlin, you're talking about Irving Berlin, Cole Porter, the Gershwin brothers. and a guy that you probably never heard of, but you sure know his songs. And this guy's name is Harry Warren. And if you've heard I Only Have Eyes for You, that's one of his. And Chattanooga Choo Choo, he went on to write, and many others.
Yes. And Irving Berlin has a great Prohibition song called I'll See You in CUBA. It's about Cuba from 1920.
And actually, there was a song written at that time called Farewell Broadway, Hello Montreal.
Yes.
Guess why we're going to Montreal?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So that these are all great questions. Thank you, everyone. And I know it's late for some people, so I again want to acknowledge you being here and being present. And just thank you so much. Are there any other questions out there? Wonderful. If you have any other questions, please contact me through the captions below. You can find me also on Patreon if you want the little program booklet. It comes with an EP. So if you buy the booklet through me or on Amazon, you get selected songs from the program that you would hear tonight. So I want to again thank the Oswego Heritage Council, the Lake Oswego Public Library. Thank you, Chris, for coming and for introducing me. And again, stay healthy, safe. If demand arises for it, maybe I will do another virtual program, maybe in the fall, before early November, depending on what happens. And when it's cooler, yes, for sure. So thank you all again for coming tonight, and I sincerely hope to see you at a future show. Thank you.